Sweats are advocating for decriminalization of sex work in South Africa more than 20 years. So today is the 1st of May. We want to raise our voice by our partners that are in front of us to say it's still quiet.
Sex work, because it's criminalized, it's not recognized as legitimate occupation. Sex workers can't actually develop the industry because when you are criminalized, you are dehumanized. Your rights are not seen and affirmed and validated. So how you are just stuck in survival.
Sex work, we need to understand it within the context of survival, of livelihood options, and of the ways in which those livelihood options intersect with gender and sexuality. So when we're saying labor, what kind of labor is present in this economy? It's a labor that is exploitative. One will work your whole life, but you will not necessarily change fundamentally the state of your family condition economically. It is no accident that in fact it is people raised a particular way, in this case predominantly black in South Africa, that would lean towards sex work as a form of livelihood. Because historically that is the group of people that have been marginalized economically.
We should not separate sex workers' issues from the real workers' issues. Look at how can we bring in the issues of sex work. Because if you want to bring them as a separate entity, you are actually saying they are special, they are not workers. So if you want them to be recognized as workers, look at the legislation that is there currently. Because the only people who can preside over cases of harassment in the world of work is the very CCMA. So start looking at legislation that we can use to fight and advocate for rights of sex workers.
There was a resolution that was taken at the 2012 Congress of COSATU that says, as COSATU, we are going to work with civil society organizations. We're going to have a working relationship. And one of the civil society organizations is Sweat, Sisonke, and I can't count them. So I am there now. Let's try to have a working relationship in terms of seeing how we take this thing off. When we do these submissions, let's involve people like you understand, people like the sex workers that would have the understanding of what they are saying and what they want, in conjunction with COSATU.
And we know in this country, again, because of the history of this country, that unions do hold significant political power.
The only problem is that in terms of the trade union movement, our doors are very closed and limited because there are no workers in the trade union movement who actually stood up and said, I am a sex worker. But as FEDUSA, we still stand by our support for decriminalization of sex work.
Because sex workers dare in a capitalistic, masculine, patriarchal world, not only do they enjoy sex, they're also going to charge men.
Yes.
And I think that is such a thing for society to deal with. You know, and I think that informs a lot of the violence that sex workers are met with. Sweat surveyed over 1,000 sex workers across the country, and it revealed that in totality, 80% of sex workers have experienced violence from police. Under criminalization, sex workers are not likely to seek assistance when they are unfairly treated by a client. So if a client doesn't want to pay for services, a sex worker has nowhere to go because their work is not fundamentally seen as work by the state.
Because of the illegal status of contracts of employment, it's very difficult still to understand exactly what sex workers are entitled to in terms of labour law rights. But where there are cases that Sweat and Sisonke identify where sex workers are willing to take it forward, we need to refer labour law cases to the CCMA, possibly the Constitutional Court. But the point is some of these risks need to be taken because there's also a chance that we will be able to kind of really establish and further develop sex workers' labour law rights through going to court.
I think that's why it's important to see the court process as also an extension of existing advocacy. right? So that you can mobilize civil society, you can mobilize the unions, you can mobilize different sectors of the community. And so in terms of labor laws that empower sex workers, even within this criminalized state, I think there's a lot that can be done to affirm people's humanity as we advocate, as we move forward, to not forget that we are not completely disempowered and have no agency or autonomy. You know, the movement wouldn't have survived all these years with minimal support, to be honest, and minimal resourcing if it wasn't that fire, right, that is burning.
We're part of the negotiations of the Convention number 190 on elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. Who are we to judge what a person wants to do and how a person wants to earn a living? I would also want sex work, SWET in Western Cape and Sisonke to work very closely with our provincial executive committee in the Western Cape. Let us use our invisible power as the trade union movement to push and lobby for legislation, for change of legislation.
You're going to push for resolution alone, or you're going to invite us to be there because we need to be there so that we can push together.
I know it's always said nothing about us without us. So it is important that when legislation is done, don't think that FEDUSA will speak on your behalf. Let it be FEDUSA and SWET speaking on behalf of sex workers.
And I think as COSATU, maybe we're leaking somehow, somewhere when it comes to the voices of the sex workers. Legislation, unfortunately, is the weapon for us as workers that will take us to the next level. People hearing your voice, you fight, even if it means there's no legislation that is covering you. You fight. So whether we've been legislated or whether they've seen us, we are going to fight still. And for you as a worker that's been exploited, you need to fight for what you know is right for yourself.
So for this bill to move, Parliament has to be convinced. That means you need your arguments to make it clear that sex work is work. And in fact, it's very possible, durable work. It actually makes sense to enable sex work as an option, and it can be done safely, and it can be done in a way that where violence is not the central experience of providers and users and so on. What we are addressing when we say SWET's campaign to decriminalize sex work is we are fighting a violent system. We're fighting a legal system that is legitimately violating the right to a dignified trial, the right to access police, the right to health as a sex worker. When sex work is criminalized, then you can't go and report the case to the police. You can't then go for medication. You can't, so your rights as a human being is curtailed. Deeper in there, we are saying that, can we also allow ourselves to be economically well through sex work? Then let's go deeper. This intimate labor, can we recognize it as necessary in society? SWET is really doing the great work, and the way in which you're maneuvering this terrain is important, and it's to be continued.
Trade unions must start opening up doors for them to be accepting the informal economy workers. Sex workers can be taken as informal. So if we can keep the momentum and make sure that if we start now and say decriminalize sex work, we push for decriminalization of sex work. Let us not wait for a sex worker to die for us to raise our voice.
It really is about fundamental human rights, and that sex work and the economy for us in South Africa is a really powerful angle to take, and there's already existing legislation, as we've heard, that protects workers. So it's about how do we develop that to expand to also be inclusive of sex workers or those who are using sexual intimacy as trade. Sex work is work, and so thank you very, very much.
Thank you.